I started writing when I was in the third grade. I mean, I was always writing stories as a kid, and I was writing novels when I was in my teens and early 20s, and we can be grateful that they were not published. So I always wanted to write, and I think in many ways I was inspired. Not everyone likes to hear this, but I think I was inspired by television. I loved TV, and I loved watching TV crime shows. And sometimes I would take those characters, it's what they call fan fiction today. I would take those characters and write my own stories about them. So I was always doing that. And being a writer was kind of all I ever wanted to be when I was growing up. This will date myself because you'll see figure how old I am, but I mean, my all-time favorite show was a spy show called The Man from U.N.C.L.E. When I was a kid, I loved that show, and Mission Impossible, and Columbo, and Mannix, and I loved these shows, and I would often write stories with those characters, because one episode a week wasn't enough for me. I had to have more. There are a lot of writers who inspire me, who I a lot of times I'll read other authors and I think, boy, I'm glad you don't have to be this good to get published. There's probably no author who had a greater influence on me than a crime writer named Ross McDonald, he was a very popular American crime writer from the 50s through the 70s. And when I discovered his novels in my teens, I was just amazed at how you could take the mystery novel and do all these great things with it. You could do social commentary, you could talk about environmentalism, you could talk about dysfunctional families. And he was really an inspiration to me. But there are so many writers who I love Philip Roth. I went years never reading Philip Roth, and then finally discovered him about 10 years ago and thought, wow, he's amazing. But there's so many, but none had any greater effect on me than Ross McDonald. Let me tell you about Stephen King, who's been one of my favorite authors forever. And I think my introduction to Stephen King was being in a theater in 1977 and seeing the movie Carrie. I love his stuff. And then we found out about 3 or 4 years ago that he was a fan of my books. He did a review in a magazine mentioning an earlier novel of mine called Never Look Away, and loved it. So when we had the early copies of this novel, we sent them to him, and he read it and gave us wonderful comments for the cover. And so he's a fan. But the really amazing thing was, in this novel, it's based on Google Street View, but I call it World 360. And if you read Stephen King's latest novel, Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining, there's a reference in it where the bad guys are trying to find somebody, so they use World 360 to try to find him. And I thought, no, he used that thing from my book. So I did meet him in October of last year, and at an event in Toronto where we live. And it was wonderful to meet him. He was very, very nice, and he's been very generous with me and with the comments. And he says to me, "Did you catch the reference to World 360 in my book?" I went, "Oh, yes." So to know that someone like that is a fan is, I was insufferable for days when I found out.